And then let's press ourselves up. We'll transition into tabletop. So we're going to get a little base position and we're going to take just a little opportunity to play with the spine. So here you can go into your traditional cat-cows if that feels appropriate, exhaling into the arch and inhaling into the belly drop, chin lift, tailbone lift. But you can also play laterally here. Just allow for a little exploration of the spine. You can also kind of go with some bilateral movement. Maybe you want to drop the right hip and lift the left shoulder. Or maybe you want to work into a tilt out to the left and a pop of that left shoulder. Just kind of move and explore. See if you can get the spine to move three-dimensionally. And then eventually, maybe 30 seconds more just to explore. We'll come back to a neutral tabletop. When you're ready, spine's going to set neutrally. Feel the finger mounds, feel the fingerprints grip into the mat. Let's curl our toes, lift our seat, and just explore one down dog. This is going to be the only time we get into this shape. Maybe pedal the calves out here. Just a little exploration of the posterior chain. Eventually, when you feel right, no rush to make that true, but when you feel right, let's come down to hands and knees tabletop, and then we'll sink our way back into child's pose. And so there's this really exceptional potter. And he has kind of built himself up in the world of pottery, of not only creating really intricate and delicate and beautiful things, but also pushing the limits of what's possible, really pushing the limits of creativity in what he throws on his potter wheel. When it feels appropriate, let's let our hands come to the mat in front of us if they're not already. We'll pull our way to tabletop and then we'll extend our legs out in front of us for a little staff. From staff, we're just going to sit in a position where our spine can get vertical. So if the knees want to bend so that the spine can get vertical, allow them to. Really think about how you can sit across the sit bones, level, balanced, and at ease. And then let's walk our hands, both hands, so right hand over to the left side of the body. Remember, knees can bend here. And you have those blankets. If the hands just aren't feeling like they're connecting, blankets or towels that can just allow for a little additional support. So our goal here is to get into a nice twist. And then we're going to start to walk that backwards. Twist deepens. The shoulder girdle, hip girdle may provide some restriction, or they may be the limiting factor. Breath is also easy to be a limiting factor or easy to be restricted here. Really think about full inhale, full exhale. And we're trying to get a little bit of angle tilt to the torso. And then we'll walk our way back up to the twist we started in. Again, knees can be bent if that feels more appropriate for you. And we're just going to try to breathe a little more deeply into this twist. Try to take in some of that space in the torso and the shoulder girdle. And then one more time, let's just walk this backwards. So we get a little torso tilt, little angle change. The right shoulder kind of determines how much the lumbar is rotating into the shape. Trying to feel the lung cavity as we put some torso kind of torsion into this angle change. And then we'll walk our way back up. And here we're going to try to rebalance in staff. Take a couple of rounds of breath so that you can find your way back to some symmetry, left, right. And then when it feels appropriate and remembering that you can bend the knees, we're just going to take ourselves forward into a quick little forward fold. This will not be a super long hold for this, especially for a yin practice. Just trying to think about this as a rebalancing of the body, even though we've asymmetrically opened our spine up thus far. And then when you're ready, when it feels balanced, when it feels appropriate, let's bring our torso back into staff. Remember, knees can bend. We're going to take the left hand over the right side, and we want to get this twist kind of felt into first, and then we walk our way back for the angle change. Deep lumbar rotation, but also a lot of that torso musculature, as it's put under this torsion load, really has to expand so that we can fully breathe. So we want to relax through the full respiration. When you're ready, we walk our way back up into that initial twist and just try to feel into the extra space we've crafted. And then when it feels appropriate, we walk our way back into this twist. Big shoulder girdle. The left shoulder determines how much rotation we put on the lumbar. And then when you feel balance left to right, we'll come back to staff. Once again, trying to reestablish this bilateral balance and then take ourselves into the forward fold, remembering that we can bend the knees to make this more expansive for our body. Just trying to allow for each cycle of respiration to dive into more and more a more and more depthful expression of this shape. So that every time we cycle through, we find a little bit more room. That may not mean that we're going further forward. The room may happen in the lung cavity. It may happen just in the expansiveness of the breath, and we may get intercostal expansion. But every cycle of breath, we're finding a little bit more room. We'll give ourselves 30 more seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, we'll walk our way back up the staff. And let's take the feet out to the width of our mat. So we have a semi-wide fold here. Wide folds are probably the bane of more yogi existence than many other shapes. So we're going to go kind of a midpoint here. And let's walk ourselves out into a symmetrical kind of mid-wide fold here. So hands can be on the ankles, the calves, the knees, the hamstrings, the toe mounds, the heels. Wherever we feel like we're getting some expansiveness, remember the knees can still bend. And just another 15 seconds here. Just trying to find expansiveness. And then when it feels appropriate, let's bring ourselves up into this modified staff. We're going to grab our props here. So both blankets or towels and our pillow or bolster. And we are going to stack those. The goal here is going to be to offer some support to this fold. I understand that finding support in this fold can be hard. So really try to stack your props as high as you need them to be so that as you come forward, you can rest your forehead or you can rest your arms, whatever that is. We want to be in a position where we're supported. Now, that being said, we can still bend the knees. We can pull that closer to us. That might take the legs wider. You could allow the bottoms of the feet to come more together here. That might be the ideal spot for you if you feel like you have both hip and hamstring restriction. Bottoms of the feet more together takes out the hamstring restriction. It still works with the hip limitation, and we can still get some really nice impact there. So find the shape that allows for the most ease while being depthful. And then we're just going to cycle through our respiration. So one of the things that this potter found more and more difficult the more he got into experimental creations is that the further he pushed away from normalcy, the further the expectation of what he could do would be from his audience, his fans, his customers. And so what kind of started out as an expression of passion had been morphing more and more into this thing he feared, into this desire not to fail others' expectations. And so what started as like unique dinner plates with a rectangular shape and rounded corners on one half and perfectly square corners on the other half had morphed and morphed into butter dishes that only held butter upside down. And his creations just became more and more experimental. And it wasn't just the physical form, it was the glaze and the coloring. Every aspect that could be tinkered with, every aspect that could be experimented with, that could be pushed, was being pushed. One year he made teacups so thin and brittle that they were single use. They were elegant and beautiful, but they were so thin that when they received the tea, they almost immediately started to disintegrate. We'll give ourselves just 60 more seconds here. Remember that we're finding space with each cycle of breath. Each cycle of breath are challenges to be more depthful in the expression of the shape we're in. When it feels appropriate for you, we can walk ourselves back towards a vertical spine. Take those props and set them to the side for the moment. And then let's keep the feet at the width they are and head into one last forward fold. Non-props, we will not be here long, but just an opportunity to compare and contrast our first fold and this fold, or our first wide leg fold and this forward fold. After that long supported hold, last 20 seconds here. And when it feels appropriate for you, bring the spine back to vertical, bring the feet back in line with the hips, and let's bend both knees so the kneecaps can point towards the ceiling. And you can give yourself a squeeze here if that feels good, bringing the torso maybe a little tilt forward. Maybe you get the anterior hip crease compression. And then we're going to let both knees fall to the left. And let that left hand really straighten the spine and take your right hand over to the left side. try to line up the right hand and left hand as much as is possible or feels comfortable while keeping the left arm as straight as possible so the spine stays as vertical as possible. And just see how it feels to gaze maybe behind you or maybe even over towards that right side of your room. So all the way over that opposite corner of your mat. You may feel some anterior pull here as the lumbar rotates even further than we've asked of it thus far. Feel cycling through those breaths. And then we'll relax back to neutral. Let the knees come back to their neutral point. Maybe you give yourself another little squeeze here. And then eventually the knees are going to fall over to the right. And we'll do the same thing to the second side. So at the right and the left hand, the more or less line up. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just as comfortable as we can do. Right arm this time stays as straight as is possible to keep this length of the torso. And then maybe we gaze straight behind us. Maybe we look over towards what is the left side of our room. Maybe we feel that anterior pull. Maybe this is just lumbar rotation. And then when you feel balanced, we'll come back to neutral. Let's grab our props just so that they're handy. And we'll take one of the blankets and we'll set that up now. So one of the blankets is going to go from shelf fold, hot dog fold. It's going to run across the mat. So at the lumbar, just above the sacrum, at that lumbar hinge. And then let's lower ourselves down onto our back. So there's an encouraged curvature of the lumbar spine here. We want to make sure that the sacrum is anchored against the mat. So if the blanket is lifting the tailbone, make sure you get the tailbone down towards the foot end of your mat enough that it can land. Arms can be a cactus or T here by your side, whatever feels ideal for you. Give ourselves about maybe one more breath cycle here, one more full breath cycle. And then when you complete that, we're going to bring our knees to a bent position if they're not already. So kneecaps point towards the ceiling. And then bring your right heel as close to the right glute as is possible and extend your left leg down the mat. And then thinking about the anterior hip crease on the right side, try to exhale out and suck that down as you pull the right thigh in towards the torso. Now, we're pulling asymmetrically, right? And so it's very easy for the sacrum to start to peel away from the mat. Really think about anchoring the sacrum as your primary focus, and then the contraction of the right thigh as your secondary focus. Meaning that if the sacrum is getting pulled away from the mat because the right thigh is getting so close to the torso, back the right thigh lift or compression off until that lift is taken away. And then you can slowly start to rebuild that compression as we relax more and more into that posterior chain musculature. Well, the right thigh can get more and more compressed as we create more and more space along the back side of the body so the sacrum doesn't have to lift. We'll give ourselves about 20 more seconds here. Release this. We're going to release the right leg so that it mirrors the left. So both legs are extended. And you may find out that that was a much more, maybe it was a sneakily impactful hip adjustment. So there may be some significant asymmetry across the hip girdle here. Maybe even a little lateral movement, uh, just to try to find your way back to balance across that hip girdle. Making sure that the direction of the feet are symmetrical. So the right leg isn't just falling open because it has more hip space and the left leg is stuck. Keep both feet pointed straight up towards the ceiling. Integrated alignment there. And then when it feels appropriate, we're going to bend both knees. And once again, settle the sacrum. Think about the sacrum settling as our primary objective. Then the right leg can extend. And then the left thigh can come in towards the torso. And that left thigh can come in towards the torso as much as is possible while keeping the sacrum anchored. Forcing us to relax the back musculature while we open this hip musculature. We'll give ourselves about 20 more seconds here. And when it feels appropriate for you, the left leg's gonna release down to mirror the right. Just trying to feel into the balance, keeping the feet integrated. Trying to release into this hip girdle. And then we'll bend both knees. Lift your tailbone high enough to slide the blanket out from underneath you. And release the tailbone down to the mat. Just allowing for the spine and the hips kind of reorient around their new positioning. And then when it feels appropriate, let's do a little dynamic butterfly here. So we're going to exhale out, the knees towards the edges of the mat, bottoms of the feet towards one another. And then inhale the knees back to neutral, kneecaps pointing towards the ceiling. Let's just do this a couple of times. Here we're looking at how the hips are reintegrating. Maybe one more time open, one more time closed. And then we're going to allow both knees to fall to the left. And then inhale back to neutral. And then we'll exhale and let both knees fall to the right. And inhale back to neutral. We're going to cycle through that a couple more times. We'll do it at your own pace, but really pay attention to how the lumbar is responding here. So as you exhale to the left, think about how the lumbar is responding, and then back to center, how the lumbar sits back in its neutral casing, and then same thing to the second side. And just cycle through these positions, these 3 positions, a few times at your own pacing. Lowering the lumbar space that we've crafted. Eventually, we're going to let both knees fall to the left for a little static hold. So when it feels like it's ready, when you feel like you're ready for that, both knees are falling to the left, static hold. You have lots of prop opportunities here. So you could take a blanket and stick that between the thighs. You could take a pillow or bolster and stick that underneath the right thigh. You could take a blanket underneath the left thigh to give a little bit of height. Maybe play with as many variations as you can really think through so that you can find the most ease here. So there were a couple of things that happened around this potter's shop. One, the town that this potter had grown up in was kind of steeped in poverty. And so there were a lot of malnourished children kind of running through the streets and the alleys around the potter's shop. Now, you have the opportunity to stay exactly where you are. If you want to deepen this, you could take that right leg and extend it out. You could even take the left hand and connect the right foot or leg. That's only if that feels like it's adding benefit. Only if it feels like the lumbar rotation and the hip integration kind of synced up in a way where this is both impactful and beneficial. And another thing that would happen is this potter would, because he was creating experimental things constantly, he would have things that didn't work out. Glazes that didn't look right, or pinching techniques that just didn't create the end products that he had hoped. And so we would end up tossing a lot of pottery away. Kind of customary practice would be to shatter it, but he didn't want to do that because he knew that children kind of pretty frequently would go through the garbage dumpsters I didn't think that having sharp shards of pottery was an appropriate thing. Last 30 seconds here. When it feels appropriate for you. Let's bring the knees back to neutral so the kneecaps can point towards the ceiling. And pause as you land here. Just send your awareness and your attention across the belt line, across the hip girdle, and see if it feels balanced, if it feels asymmetrical, if you feel like you're lopsided here, if you feel like you're aligned here. Just note how you feel. And then let's let the knees fall over to the second side, the right side. And again, you have lots of props and options. If you want to prop up for the second side, you want to explore the prop options for the second side too. If it feels appropriate for you to extend that top leg, that left leg, for a little bit more lumbar rotation, do. But only if that feels appropriate. If it doesn't feel like that's adding, or it doesn't feel like it's right on this side, don't worry about the extension. Just trying to find some space between our hips and our lumbar spine. Potter was working on this idea for a mug. And the idea itself was kind of inspired by a pitcher. And so the mug kind of pinched in at the middle, and then on either side it had openings. The pinch didn't come all the way together, so the rim never met, but it pinched in towards the center of the mug. It made the mugs oblong. But that wasn't really the experimental piece here. The experimental piece was that after these mugs were dry glazed, they were dipped in this acid that had this different reaction with the different pigments of the glaze. And what was unique about this process was there was no real way of knowing how these mugs would come out, or at least the spotter was finding out. There was no real way to know how these mugs would come out of the kiln. Some of them looked spectacular, and others just looked childish. And so he was probably throwing away two mugs for every one that he kept. Last 15 seconds here on this second side. When it feels appropriate, we're going to bring our knees back to neutral, kneecaps point towards the ceiling. And we draw all of our awareness again across the hip girdle, across the sacral connection with the mat. Just ask yourself if you feel symmetrical, if you feel asymmetrical, if you feel like you're lopsided or tilted. And just note that as you bring the bottoms of the feet together and let the knees fall out wide. And so there's the natural curvature of the lumbar spine. And there's a focus that we want to place on our breath so that our breath can allow our hips to relax, so that we can get more and more symmetry through each cycle of respiration here. So we capture more and more of that space that we opened. And we become more and more at ease here in the shape that we are. And it feels appropriate for you. Bring our knees back to neutral. Ask ourselves if we might want or need anything prior to Shavasana. If we do, we'll offer that to ourselves now. If you have everything you want, if you have everything that you need, let's just drift our way into a space where we can appreciate some stillness. So this potter would very often utilize the practice of putting things in the kiln before he went home in the evening, so that when he arrived in the morning, it would be done and ready to pull out. This particular morning, it was pouring rain. And he had a pretty disastrous kiln firing. And so he was bringing out a huge box of these inched mugs to the dumpster in the rain. And he had done that the day before. wasn't quite as big, but the day before he had brought out a huge box of these pinched mugs, and he was kind of muttering under his breath as he did this because this time he was doing it in this downpour, and he was thinking of giving up on this project. Just finding your version of stillness and your version of ease here. And so as he gets out to the dumpster, there's this little girl, malnourished. She's picking through the box that he had thrown out yesterday. And she hands two of these mugs to what looks like her little brother. And the potter sees them and he's like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Well, someone threw away these perfectly good mugs." And he's like, "No, those are not perfectly good mugs. They're not finished. Come inside and I'll get you good mugs." And so they like kind of follow him over to the door, but when they get there, they're like covered in mud and they look at him and they're like, "Why don't we just wait out here?" Because they're looking inside his shop, his studio, and it's just like pristine and white and just immaculate. And so he goes in and he goes into the back. And while he's doing that, they go over to this rain spout and they fill their cups to the brim with this perfectly crystal clear rainwater. Let's start to move our fingers and our toes. Our wrists and our ankles, our elbows and our knees. Shoulders, hips. The hips move. Think about the lumbar integration. Think about the spine and the hips kind of moving with one another, integrating with one another. Eventually, the whole body will move and we'll utilize that movement to transition into a seat. Until eventually he comes back out with these two really intricate, beautiful mugs. Ones that looked the way he wants them to look. And they see him carrying this and they're holding these mugs full of water and they look at him and they're like, "Sir, like you don't need you were wrong. These are perfect. Look, they're holding water and they're holding it up and no water's dripping out." And the little girl just looks up at him and says, "This mug is perfectly complete." Letting your spine and breath just ease into the fluidity of the shape. Let's let our eyes close and we'll bring our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you remind yourself that there's nothing you need to do or say or do to yourself to be complete? Because you're already everything that you are. And see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this evening's practice, for taking care of yourself, and for being you. Namaste. Happy Monday, guys. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for taking care of yourself. Hope you had a beautiful long weekend. Take care of your spine, sleep well. I'll be back on Sunday to recharge and we'll do movement on Monday. Love you guys.